The diner was mostly empty that night, just the regulars sipping coffee and the hiss of the grill in the back. Rain tapped softly on the windows of Sunnyside Cafe, the only 24-hour joint in sleepy Willow Creek, population 3,406 and shrinking. Ella Parker wiped down the counter like she always did, small, tight circles, the same way her grandfather had taught her to polish carburetors. Her apron smelled like bacon and dish soap. Her shoes hurt, but her mind wasn't on the job, not really. She glanced up at the clock, 12:04 a.m. Liam would be fast asleep back home, probably curled up with that beat-up copy of The Iron Giant she'd read to him since he was 5. He was 13 now, too old for bedtime stories, but still too young to carry what she carried. The bell above the diner door didn't ring, but the sound outside grabbed everyone's attention. A growl, not a roar, something expensive coughing its last breath. Ella peeked through the window and narrowed her eyes. There it was, sleek, black, unmistakable. A Rolls-Royce Phantom, hood up, steam rising like a ghost in the misty dark. "Rich folks don't usually get lost around here," murmured Dean, the line cook, as he flipped a pancake that no one had ordered. Ella no respondio. She grabbed her jacket, brushed off her hands, and stepped outside. The rain was cold, but not mean, just enough to keep secrets buried in the mud. The man standing by the car was tall, sharply dressed, and clearly not from Willow Creek. He looked more like a man who owned buildings that touched clouds. His hair was slick but not too perfect, and his coat looked like it cost more than the diner's yearly rent. He turned as she approached. "I don't suppose you've got a mechanic around here?" Ella didn't flinch. She tucked her damp hair behind her ear. "Not until morning, but I can take a look." The man blinked, surprised. "You?" She didn't smile. "Problem with that?" He raised both hands slightly. "By all means." 5 minutes later, Ella was under the hood, her fingers moving with quiet confidence. The engine coughed again. She adjusted something by feel, an old habit from her grandfather's garage. Then, like magic, it came alive. The man stared at her. "How did you—" "I listened," she said simply, wiping her hands on a rag. That's when he noticed her wrist, a faded leather strap, a gleam of gold beneath the grime, and a watch, not just any watch, a Patek Philippe. His eyes froze. The air around him stilled. "That watch," he said slowly. "Where did you get it?" Ella stiffened. Her thumb brushed over the face instinctively. "It was my grandfather's." The man's voice dropped into a whisper. "Joe Parker?" Ella looked up, eyes narrowing. "How do you know that name?" He didn't answer right away, because Mason Brooks had just recognized the watch of the man his father spent a lifetime erasing from history, and the past he thought was buried was about to roar back to life. Ella's breath caught in her throat. She wasn't sure if it was the way he'd said her grandfather's name, Joe Parker, or the way his face changed when he saw the watch, like he'd seen a ghost and couldn't decide whether to run or beg it for forgiveness. "You knew him?" she asked, her voice low, cautious. Mason Brooks didn't answer right away. He looked past her, toward the steaming car, then back at her wrist. "I've seen that watch before. My father used to talk about a man named Joe Parker, a mechanic, said he was brilliant, said he stopped himself. Ella Cruzos's Brazos. Said he what?" Mason looked up. His voice was quieter now, almost reluctant. "Said he didn't know when to stay in his lane." Ella flinched like she'd been slapped. "That sounds like your father's problem, not his." Mason didn't defend it, just nodded. "You're probably right." The air between them thickened with things neither of them wanted to say. Ella wiped her hands on the back of her jeans, suddenly uncomfortable under his gaze. Not because it felt threatening, but because it felt like he was seeing something he hadn't expected, and she didn't like being surprised. Not anymore. "I didn't catch your name," she said finally. "Mason," he replied. "Mason Brooks." Ella blinked. The name landed like a thunderclap in her mind. Brooks Enterprises, of course. Everyone in Willow Creek knew the name. It was stamped on the side of skyscrapers, shipping containers, tech patents, and luxury brochures. It was a name you didn't question. It belonged to a dynasty, and it belonged to the man standing in front of her, soaked from the rain, looking like he'd just collided with a truth he wasn't ready for. Ella took a step back. "Your father," she said slowly, "was Richard Brooks." Mason nodded. She felt the sting rise in her throat. "Then I think we're done here." She turned to walk back toward the diner, but Mason stepped forward. "Wait," he said. "Please." "I didn't know." She spun around. "Didn't know what?" "That your father ruined my grandfather's life? That he shut down his shop, blacklisted him from every manufacturer in the region, and took credit for everything they built together?" Mason looked pained. "I didn't know any of that." Ella stared at him, breathing hard. "My grandfather died with grease under his nails and bills on the counter. He left behind blueprints no one ever saw, engines no one ever understood, and a broken family trying to figure out why the world forgot him." Silence. Then Mason said quietly, "Maybe the world didn't forget. Maybe it was told to." Ella no respondio. The rain picked up again, pattering on the pavement like applause for a conversation that had gone too far. Then Mason took out a business card and held it out to her. "If you ever want to talk, or if that watch ever needs fixing, come find me." She didn't take it, but she didn't walk away either. The next morning, Ella was back at the diner, apron tied tight, hair pulled into a quick knot. She moved like she always did, fast, focused, invisible. Plates clinked, coffee brewed, and the hum of normalcy pressed against the strange weight she still felt from last night. She hadn't told anyone about the encounter, not about the Rolls-Royce, not about Mason Brooks, and definitely not about what he'd said about her grandfather. She had barely slept. Liam had noticed. "You look like you lost a fight with a tornado," he said over toast that morning, his usual attempt at humor. Ella just smiled faintly. "Long shift. Go easy on me." But it wasn't the shift. It was the way Mason had looked at her. Not like she was just a waitress who happened to know engines, but like she was holding a key to something he'd been missing without realizing it. And now she couldn't unhear what he'd said. Maybe the world didn't forget. Maybe it was told to. Around 11 a.m., while she was topping off a trucker's coffee, a black SUV pulled into the parking lot. It wasn't flashy, but it was clean in a way most local cars weren't. The engine purred rather than grumbled. Ella's stomach tightened. He walked in like someone who didn't belong in diners but had decided he wanted to. Mason. Again. He sat at the counter, not waiting for an invitation. "Black coffee," he said gently, "and a second chance." Ella sospirò pero echó el vaso. "You're persistent." "I'm a CEO," he said with a small shrug. "We're trained that way." She set the cup down. "You here to tell me more about how your family erased mine?" Mason shook his head. I'm here to offer you something." She raised an eyebrow. "I looked you up," he said. "Top of your class in engineering for 2 semesters. Dropped out when your mom died. Started working double shifts, raising your brother. But before that? You had a scholarship, letters of recommendation. There's even a photo of you next to a rebuilt 1969 Mustang that won a regional showcase." Ella felt her face flush. "You had no right." "I had every right," Mason said quietly, "once I realized your grandfather helped build what my family lives off of. I had a right to understand what I didn't before." Ella gripped the counter. "So now what? You feel guilty?" Mason shook his head. I feel responsible." He reached into his coat and pulled out a folder. "I want to offer you a job, not as a waitress, as an engineer, head of a special design team, full salary, Chicago headquarters. Start when you're ready." Ella's hands trembled slightly as she took the folder. "And your reason?" she asked, voice sharp. Mason held her gaze. "Because I think your grandfather built more than engines. I think he built legacy, and I want to help you finish what he started." Ella stood outside the diner during her break, folder in hand, heart pounding louder than the traffic from Main Street. Inside were papers, company credentials, and an offer so generous she almost dropped it. 6 figures, relocation stipend, medical benefits, housing for her and Liam. It should have felt like winning the lottery, but it didn't, because under the salary and title she saw something else. A wound. A guilt stitched into the seams of the pages. She stared at the worn watch on her wrist, its face scratched but still ticking faintly. Her grandfather's voice echoed in her memory. "The world's full of engines, Ellie. But only a few run on truth." 2 weeks later, she stood in front of a gleaming glass tower in downtown Chicago, Liam beside her, eyes wide with wonder. The city felt like a different planet, clean, fast, loud, and full of faces that didn't stop to smile. Mason met them at the private entrance, dressed in tailored navy and a guarded expression. He greeted Liam first. Smart move. Ella respected that. Her new office looked like something out of a sci-fi movie. Glass walls, interactive screens, even a coffee machine that somehow knew her order. But none of it impressed her like the basement. Because that's where she found it. In a forgotten archive room, behind locked cabinets and dusty filing drawers, buried under 30 years of neglect, she found a file labeled JP-EV Project, Joe Parker, Electric Vehicle. Ella abrió el folder lentamente, manos temblando. Inside were blueprints drawn by hand, designs for a compact, zero-emission engine far more advanced than anything on the market today. A dated sketch of a battery system so efficient it looked like science fiction, and stamped in the corner, property of Brooks Enterprises. Do not disclose. Her breath caught. This wasn't just a project. It was a secret. Her grandfather hadn't been erased because he failed. He'd been buried because he succeeded. Mason stood in the doorway, silent, watching her expression. "You knew," she whispered, not turning around. "I suspected," he admitted, "but I hadn't seen it. Not until now." Ella turned to face him. "Your father buried this, stole credit, built an empire on my grandfather's genius." Mason didn't deny it. "I think he did." The silence stretched between them. Ella felt a fury rising in her chest, sharp and familiar. She could use this, sue the company, destroy Brooks Enterprises, take it all down in her grandfather's name. She could end it, or she could finish it. "What happens if this patent goes public?" she asked. Mason exhaled slowly. "The entire company shifts, lawsuits, layoffs. The board would implode. We might lose everything." Ella looked at the blueprints, then at her hands. Grease had been in her blood since she could walk. She didn't want revenge. She wanted justice, and something better. "I don't want to destroy what he built," she said quietly. "I want to build what he dreamed of." Ella didn't sleep that night. She sat at the kitchen table of their temporary apartment, blueprints spread across every inch, the same way her grandfather used to do. Liam wandered out around midnight, rubbing his eyes. "Is this homework?" he asked groggily. "No," she said with a tired smile. "It's history." She pulled him onto her lap like when he was little. "Liam, Grandpa Joe, he didn't just fix engines. He built something that could have changed the world, but someone took it from him." Liam didn't speak, but he leaned his head against her shoulder. That was answer enough. The next morning, Ella walked into Mason's office. This time, she didn't knock. He looked up from a sea of spreadsheets and reports. "I take it you made a decision?" She nodded. "I want 3 things," she said, voice steady. 1. My grandfather's name restored as co-founder of Brooks Enterprises. Publicly, in every record, plaque, and history book. Mason nodded slowly. "Done." 2. This engine gets developed, but not in secret and not to maximize profit. I want oversight, ethical use, community partnerships, a real legacy. He didn't flinch. "I agree." And 3, she said, placing a hand over the blueprints. We turn his old garage in Willow Creek into a training center. For kids like me, like Liam, who don't get second chances unless they build them themselves. Mason leaned back in his chair, genuinely impressed. And your role? He asked. Ella sonrió por primera vez en días. Partner, not employee. A silence settled between them, then he stood and extended his hand. Welcome to the board, Miss Parker. It wasn't charity. It was recognition. Weeks passed. The official announcement went live across every media outlet. Brooks Enterprises honors forgotten co-founder in historic patent release. Photos of Joe Parker surfaced. Grainy black and whites of a man in overalls, grease on his cheek, blueprints under his arm. Ella's name appeared beside Mason's in press releases, interviews, and tech panels, but it wasn't the press that mattered. It was the soft knock on her office door late one evening. Liam stood there, eyes glowing. I got in, he said, holding up an envelope. Engineering camp, full ride. Ella felt her chest swell, not just with pride, but with peace. Her grandfather's legacy had passed through her hands like a tool in a workshop, reforged, reimagined, and finally used for something good. Later that week, she returned to Willow Creek. The diner still smelled like bacon and soap. Dean gave her a wink and a free slice of pie. And next door, in the skeleton of Joe's old garage, work had begun. Walls going up, banners printed with the words, "The Parker Center for Mechanical Arts." Not revenge, not destruction, but something better, something built to last. The ribbon-cutting ceremony at the Parker Center wasn't flashy. There were no luxury cars, no red carpets, no tech tycoons giving hour-long speeches, just folding chairs, hand-painted signs from local students, and grease-streaked hands holding tools instead of champagne. But for Ella, it was perfect. She stood on the front step of her grandfather's old garage, now fully transformed, beside Mason, Liam, and a crowd of small-town neighbors who remembered Joe Parker as more than a name. They remembered the man who fixed their engines and never charged extra when times were hard. The man who taught kids how to change oil before they knew how to drive. The man whose genius had been silenced, until now. Mason handed Ella the scissors, his voice low. This is yours. Ella no dudo. The ribbon fell. The crowd clapped. And somewhere, she swore she could hear her grandfather's voice, soft and proud. You done good, Ellie. Inside the center, everything felt alive. Workbenches, toolkits, holographic displays beside carburetors. It was old-school grit meeting modern brilliance, and it worked. Ella stood in the back corner for a while, watching the first group of teens in overalls gather around a partially disassembled engine. Miss Parker, one of them asked, what's this part called? She smiled and stepped forward. That's the crankshaft, but the real power's in what connects it. The kid frowned. You mean the bolts? Ella Rio. Number I mean the people. Later that afternoon, Mason found her in her office, the same one her grandfather used to nap in between shifts. He leaned against the doorframe, arms folded. You ever think about what might have happened if your watch hadn't slipped into view that night? Ella held up her wrist, now clean and polished. The Patek Philippe gleaming faintly in the light. This little thing? She asked, smiling. Guess it was always meant to speak when I couldn't. Mason stepped inside. You could have taken us down, you know, the whole company. The board's still talking about how close we came to collapse. Ella assentiu. But I didn't want collapse. I wanted change. He studied her for a moment. You got it. Outside the office window, Liam stood next to a younger boy, both elbow-deep in an old transmission. The boy laughed. Liam showed him something, then gave a thumbs up. Ella's chest warmed. This was never about fixing a car, she said. It was about fixing what was broken in all of us. Mason looked at her then, not like a billionaire, not like a CEO, but like a man who understood that real inheritance doesn't live in money or metal. It lives in stories passed down, truths fought for, and hands that refuse to let go of what matters. The watch had sparked it all, but Ella built the future, and it was only just beginning.